Perfect.
Good to go. Well, welcome to the end of day one here at the Gaydon Land Rover Show 2018. It's been monumental. We're all absolutely shattered and clearly look it, but we're going to press on because I cannot let today go by without interviewing some of the most important people to me who've bought one of the most special vehicles here, and it's where the Land Rover story really kicks off in the early days. I'm going to let the one and only, my true legend, Richard Bedell, lead the interview, but I'd like to welcome to the show for the live stream, of course, we've got Adam Bennett, the one and only Adam Bennett, Tim Slessor, and these two you will know. If I mention the word Oxford, that is probably all I need to say. Richard Bedell, I'll let you take this interview and lead the way, and we'll talk us through the history and the story because it is absolutely monumental.
Absolutely. Well, we're so privileged to have Tim Slessor here. When I was a schoolboy, I followed this wonderful, wonderful story of these lunatics who took these two Land Rovers miles and miles across countries that people had never heard of. And I always thought, well, what the most fantastic thing to have achieved. And there are various aspects of this that one remembers, and no doubt they'll come up during the course of this discussion. But Tim, as I said, it's such a privilege to have you here. What started this wonderful Oxford and Cambridge expedition off? How did it happen?
Well, first off, you're very flattering and embarrassing, really. How did it happen? I was in college at Cambridge, and my immediate neighbour was a fellow I knew, obviously, because he was my immediate neighbour, and we were having coffee one evening, as one does, and he came from Hong Kong. I mean, he was an Englishman, but his parents ran the big supermarkets in Hong Kong, and he had this crazy idea of driving from Europe to Hong Kong. And I rather poo-pooed it and said, oh, you'll pay for it by opening a chutney mine or something, because it was the height of the Cold War. And I said, you're wasting your time. Then I got to thinking, perhaps Singapore. I'd done my national service in that part, in Malaya, and I was reading geography and geology, so I knew a bit about that neck of the woods. And I thought Singapore might just be possible, whereas Hong Kong wasn't. And we continued talking into the night and discussing possible routes and this and that. I mean, quite crazy. But by about midnight, we thought, well, hell, we'll give it a go. The next thing was to approach the Rover car company, as it was then, because we thought Jeeps might have been possible, but a bit too small. Dodge 1500 weight power wagon, super. I'd driven them during my national service, but too big, too wide. And there was this thing called a Land Rover, come from somewhere up in the Midlands. Well, the Rover Car Company, I think. So we wrote off to them, and well, I could go on, but when they must have had some imagination, because they said, yeah, okay. So
how marvellous. Well, it was marvellous, and it's great that the Rover Car Company did that. And they did that sort of thing in those days. They were quite entrepreneurial. They allowed people to use their products, and it was a very good way of marketing.
Took risks.
They took risks. And it was a good way of marketing their products and getting the products advertised in the newspapers. There was no internet, obviously, in those days. It got them in the newspapers and in the magazines, and you succeeded. You succeeded.
Well, we succeeded, yes. I mean, to go back a little bit, the team sort of more or less assembled itself. We recognized right at the beginning, the two of us, that we needed two vehicles in support of each other. I mean, crossing rivers and things, you put in one vehicle. Even at that stage, naive though we may have been, we realized that, you put in one vehicle, and if it doesn't work, you can pull it back and start again. If it does get through and the second one stops, you can, etc., etc. But I think one of the curious, sort of clever things, if I can say that we did, I can say that because I don't know who was responsible. Someone said we need an Oxford element. We were all Cambridge. Because if we have an Oxford element, if we have someone from Oxford, and there were 5 of us now, so don't fill the 6th, keep it for someone from Oxford, because then we can call ourselves the Oxford and Cambridge expedition. And also we can paint one car dark blue and the other car light blue. And even at 22 or 23, which was all we were sufficiently switched on to recognize that light blue, dark blue bit immediately not merely increased the publicity potential, but quadrupled it.
And just remind us, because I can't remember, who was the Oxford?
A young chap called Nigel Newberry. And we sent a posse, so to speak, over to Oxford to find somebody. And I think Nigel was the secretary of the Oxford Explorers or something. And he said, well, bugger, if you'll excuse the term, finding somebody, what's wrong with me? So he was in.
Great.
So, yes.
So what were the names? I can't remember off the top of my head. What were the names of all the final team?
Well, there was me, Tim. There was Adrian was my neighbour. There was Pat Murphy, Nigel Newberry, Barrington Brown, BB. He was a bit older than the rest of us. He'd graduated 2 years earlier, and it was ran a small photographic business in Cambridge. And we went to him and said, we need a cameraman, photographer. Yeah. Can you recommend anybody? And again, he said, well, but, I don't need. What's wrong with me? So he was on board.
Yes. Yes, I remember when I organised, 20-odd years ago, to reunite you all. We reunited you all for the first time for quite a long time in Dunsfold Village Hall. We got to Dunsfold Village Hall, and I think it was BB who'd been in contact with us and said, do you know where these two Land Rovers are? And I think that's what prompted the reunion that we had, that famous reunion at Dunsfold that evening. May
have been. Of course, by that time, within a year, within 18 months of our getting back, because we didn't drive all the way back. We drove back from Calcutta through Afghanistan and Syria and Iraq and Iran, you name it, which you can't do now.
Yeah.
The Rover Car Company restored both those vehicles and lent one of them to the British centenary ornithological, i.e. birdwatching, expedition to Ascension Island, and it gave good service in Ascension, and at the end the expedition, the bird watching expedition, asked the Rover Company, presumably by cable because there was no email in those days, and I doubt that Ascension was on the phone, what to do with the vehicle. And the Rover Car Company said, give it, I think they said give it or sell it very cheaply, to someone who's been a help. And they gave it to a chap, and most of the people on Ascension were on contract. And most of them came from St. Helena, which is even further in the South Atlantic, and he took it back with him to St. Helena, where it gave good service for 30 years. And, then finally old age caught up with it, and it was parked in the grass and became year after year after year derelict.
Well, does that bring us quite nicely on to Adam?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Well, that's...
Because everything depends on... That old thing would still be in bits, unknown, 3 and 4 inches under the earth, some of it, and in the grass, if it weren't for Adam.
Absolutely. Here. Well, Adam, just tell us a little bit about how you found this vehicle and the wonderful undertaking of bringing it back.
So finding it, we knew that it was on St. Helena.
We?
Well, when I say we, I knew it was on St. Helena. I'd done some research. I'd been looking for...
Can I just interrupt a moment? Pretty much everybody connected with the expedition knew it was in St. Helena, and I, for one, would get a phone call every now and again, perhaps once a year or twice a year, from somebody who would say, "Oh, Tim Slep, blah 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 blah. We're going to bring it. We're going to bring it back." And initially, I was very, oh, terrific. After about 5 years, I would say, "Well, best of luck," because it never happened.
No.
Then I got a call from a Yorkshireman, and the Yorkshireman, I thought, hey, he's from Yorkshire.
Yes.
Now, they don't say, if they say something, they mean it.
That's right.
Over to you, Adam.
That's right.
Okay,
this is the Yorkshireman.
Very flattering.
No.
So, it was known that the car was there. I didn't know whereabouts. I had done extensive research.
Can I ask, just before we go any further, what was your interest, or why had you gone looking for it?
I had...
He's a Rover nut.
I
Rover nut.
was a Rover nut for years and years and years, and I'd moved on to other things. One of my clients, I'm a student letting agent for a trade, so one of my landlords was coming in. He deals in vehicles, especially Land Rovers, and he came in and he went on and on and on about the end of the Defender.
Yeah.
Defender's coming to an end, no more Defenders. He was going to get one, it was going to go up in value, blah, blah, blah. So after I'd heard this for about 6 months, I thought, I'm going to buy a Defender. So I bought a Defender, and then you immediately remember what you've been missing, not driving around in a Land Rover, so I got the bug again. So then I decided that I'd like to build one, and I looked at building one, and then I thought, let's restore one. And then I looked at the cost involved, because obviously it's years since I've worked on restoring Land Rovers, and then I thought, if we're going to spend this amount of money and time, it really needs to be on something that's worthwhile.
Yes.
So at the end of it, we've not just saved another Land Rover, we've saved something that's significantly interesting to warrant the time and money that I was going to pour into it.
Yes.
So I made a short list of about half a dozen vehicles. Production car number 1 was on the list. Oxford and Cambridge were on the list, and various other Land Rovers were on the list. So I put the cars in the order of which I thought was going to be the easiest to deal with. So production car number 1, Dewey, that's about 2 hours north of where I live, so I thought, this is easy, this must be the easiest. I can buy this car, naively, buy this car off the owner, nip up to Northumberland or wherever it was and pick it up. And then I thought, well, if that doesn't happen, because what I didn't want to do is, I didn't want to get bogged down with one, waste a load of time on, and then to find it came to nothing.
Yep.
So I decided to multi-track several vehicles at the same time. So I started working on that one. I then thought, I'd read the stories and talked to people about the Cambridge car, and I thought, this is going to be dead easy. This car's got off a ravine on the border between Turkey and Iran, and all I have to do is go there and look down this ravine and winch it out. I thought, this is going to be easy. And then I thought, and this car on Centre Lane, I thought, this is going to be really difficult. I can't get to the island. You can get to the island. In those days there wasn't an airstrip, so the only way on the island was by the RMS St Helena, the mail ship, and that does a 1 month round robin round the islands. It starts off at Cape Town, it goes to St Helena, it goes to Ascension, and then it goes to another island and goes back round them all again. So to do that, what you could do is you could fly in those days from RAF Bryce Norton to
Ascension, yeah.
Then you could jump on the mail ship, and if you timed it properly, you could get there in a few days. But you couldn't get off in a few days. Obviously, it was going to be probably a month or 6 weeks to get off.
Yeah.
And
So-
you still thought this was looking a good idea?
Yeah, I thought what we're going to do here is, this is easy. So I said to one of the young chaps that works for me, I said, what are you doing next week? So he says, nothing much. Why? What have we got on? So I said, I wonder if you can just go down to Ascension for me. And he looked at me and he said, well, I've got something on at the weekend. I could go the following week. So I said, oh, okay, that'll do. That'll be fine. So I said, start researching now, please. RAF Bryce Norton, organise a flight, go down there, sort it out, get a sat phone, get whatever you need. So he says, well, what am I going to look for? I don't know. I said, you're going to look for a Land Rover. So I gave him a crash course on what to look for and who we should be speaking to. And I thought, we're going to do this. This is easy enough. He agreed to it. And then I came up with the idea of running a newspaper article. I found out that on a St Helena there was 2 newspapers that publish weekly, and I decided to contact them and run a 1-page advert with them. So I contacted them, they agreed to let me take out a single-page advert for a month.
This was to find the Land Rover.
Yeah, but it didn't say, I am looking for this vehicle. I've taken a photograph. I've taken a photograph of a similar Series 1 that I own that was in a similar state.
Yeah.
And I just had that picture of that Series 1 saying, I'm looking for old vehicles like this to export back to the UK. do you have them? Do you know anybody that's got anything like this? At the same time, under the Freedom of Information Act, I applied to the St Helenan government for information on the vehicle, because I'd seen the photographs that had been in LRO magazine showing the registration number.
Yes.
And they came back and they said, this vehicle is bearing Ascension number plates that we've got no records of whatsoever. We don't have any records, and if we did, we don't know how it stands with freedom of information. So I thought, right, let's roll with the advert. So I was in conversation at the time with Peter Galloway from LRO regarding another vehicle that I'm currently restoring. I've got a 1953 Easion. So Peter's been very interested in the Easion. So I said to Peter, this is what I'm doing. I'm gonna run this newspaper article, and with that, Peter obviously knew the person to contact on the island, and he realised it was going to be easier just to give me the man's email address rather than.
Oh, he knew it, did he?
Yeah. So what had happened is, on St Helena there is a Land Rover enthusiast called Bruce Salt. And Bruce Salt is the man that you go to if you want a part for your Land Rover.
I see.
Bruce Salt would be here today photographing every car if he didn't live 6,000 miles away. He is the biggest Land Rover enthusiast on that side of the equator. And he keeps a book of all the vehicles, all the Land Rovers on St Helena, engine numbers, chassis numbers, who owns them, when they were imported, all that kind of information. And he's got a friend on the island called, everybody on St Helena has nicknames, so his friend's called Farmer Gary Stevens. So Farmer Gary has got a Series 1, he's got an 88-inch, and Farmer Gary needed a part for his car. They can't get parts for 90s and 110s on St Helena's, so no chance for Series 1s. So Bruce Salt wrote to the LRO magazine saying, hey, we need a part, and they answered the call, and they give him information of how to get the part and who could fix them up. And at that point in time, Peter Galloway realised that he had a man on the island who was a Land Rover enthusiast and even was dealing with Series 1. So Peter Galloway had been in contact with Bruce Salt since the early 90s regarding SNX 891. He'd got him to photograph it, find out who owned it, do the research on the vehicle.
Was it abandoned?
No, what had happened is Tim started the story when the bird watching expedition closed down. They basically opened the doors on all their huts and said to all the people that they knew in the area, we're taking our hand luggage, anything you want on this camp you take. And people would just come in, open a drawer, look through the drawer, help themselves, and in 2 weeks the full base camp had gone from everything being there to being completely stripped.
And in one of the drawers was a Land Rover.
Well, this is the interesting thing. At the end of the expedition, they'd contacted Land Rover and they'd said, we're winding it up, what do you want to do with the car? I think that Land Rover had probably worked out that by then they had the Series 2s. They probably thought that the thing was scrap and it wasn't worth the time and effort bringing it back. If they'd asked to see a photograph, they'd have seen that the thing was still like brand new. Because I've got colour photographs of the vehicle.
Have you?
And the colour photographs, there's cinefilm as well. But if you saw the car, it was a stripped out Jeep that turned it into a Jeep. And the reason they turned it into a Jeep was because initially
They turned the cab, took the cab off.
I see. It's a sort of open. It was just an open top Series 1.
They'd taken the door tops off. They'd taken the hard top off, and I thought that this was so they could use it as a pickup, but it wasn't. The reason they'd done that was because it was so hot out there.
I see.
It was the only way they could keep cool. They were cooking with the hard top.
And
on.
Did they keep the hard top? Was the hard top there?
The hard top was abandoned behind one of their wooden huts.
But it was there?
Oh yeah, and the rear door. And what they would get is there's a wonderful selection of photographs of the car as a Jeep. It got stripped off on day 2 of the expedition. Americans would visit them to do with their work, and the Americans would go around the back and say, hey, what's this first Overland? So they'd explain the story of first Overland. because somebody had repainted the first Overland logo on the back door. It's interesting because when the car went back to the factory, after Tim had finished with it, Rover stripped the car back to something like the original grey colour and had removed sort of all the expedition equipment, just leaving the basics still on it, and the vehicle had been put back into one colour. So, when the expedition wound down, there was a water bowser driver, and the water bowser driver who'd been delivering water to their camp regular, they gave him the car. He worked on the island for a long time, and he retired in 1977. In 1977, he towed Oxford off the island with his 88. Somewhere along the line, Oxford's hardtop had been rebolted back onto it, so it was back as a station wagon. We have photographs of the car as a station wagon in the ownership of its new owner.
So how did you come to get to this point where you thought, actually, I am going to bring it back?
Well, yeah, then that happened very, very quickly, because once Peter Galloway gave me the contact details of Bruce Salt, I sent Bruce Salt an email which basically said, I don't know where to start on this, but I'm looking to send a shipping container over and somebody to come over to have a look for this car. Could you help me? Do you know where it is? Could you ask the owner if he'd let me have it, and would he put in a shipping container for me?
And had you been in touch with Tim or any of the crew at this point?
Well, I was dealing with a chap called Michael Geary, because he was building the engine on my Easy-On at the time. And of course, Michael Geary is the person that built the Oxford and Cambridge replica. So he'd been heavily involved with Tim some nearly 10 years before with the replicas, and they were planning to go back, because Michael Geary is a Cambridge student. They were planning to go back and rerun it, and I think there'd been some big floods in India, and the thing had collapsed.
Yeah.
So when did you decide that you were going to?
So when did Tim get involved? I can't quite remember how it dropped into place, but basically, once Michael Geary had said, that he had an interest in this car, and that that he really wanted to be the person to bring it back, and he wanted to do the car. In the meantime, I'd sort of then backed off because I was tracking other vehicles. So I said to him, "Look, Michael, if you want this car, I'm not going to sort of step on your toes. I'll just keep going after something else." So this is tracking back slightly, and then we heard that somebody was going out there. They were trying to obtain the car, and it was going to be sold, but when I say go abroad, not come back to the UK. So I contacted him and said, I've had it on good authority that somebody is in the process of trying to obtain the vehicle.
You jumped in, yeah.
And it might be Land Rover, but I don't think it is, and it's never going to be coming back to the UK. So I said, are you bringing it back? What's happening? Michael Geary contacted Land Rover and asked them the question point blank, is it you that's bringing this car back? Have you got an agent working for you? They said, nothing to do with us whatsoever. The question was asked, are you thinking of doing anything imminently? No, we're not. So I thought, we've got to steam ahead with this.
Absolutely.
And we found out in the end, we found the person. He was...
Oh, don't worry about him. We want to hear your story.
You couldn't believe it. He was about a month behind me, and he managed to get Bruce Salt's email address, and he'd emailed him saying, it was a cheeky email. It was an email saying that the car was sentimental, historic family interest, and it tried to say how it was belonged to a family member.
Oh, thank heavens you got it. Thank
Yeah,
heavens you
yeah.
got it. So at this point, do you then say to Tim and the rest of the crew, look, I'm bringing it back.
Well, Tim was my first point in contact. I can't remember how we got in contact, but there was a telephone conversation, probably an email and a telephone conversation.
That would have arisen because I wrote the book. You see.
Yeah.
So,
That's right.
Michael Geary said, what he said was, once he knew this was definitely happening, because I kept him in the loop, this is definitely happening, I've got a container organised, I've got the man on board, the man that owns the car, this is it, because everyone just presumes that the chap that owned it was willing to let it go. For years, he hadn't.
Yeah.
He'd been bothered for years by people wanting it, and he'd turned them down.
But you've done it. So Tim, who's written the book, and
That's right.
You know about the book. Did you?
I hadn't read Tim's book.
All right.
I'm dyslexic and I find reading very difficult. So at that stage, I hadn't read Tim's book.
So you then got in touch, or did?
We got in touch, and Tim arrived up on the train more or less the next day.
So what did you think, Tim, when you knew
Exactly.
this was
What did you
happening?
think of the car when you saw the car?
Well, Adam here got in touch with me and he said, I'm going to bring it back. And I probably gave him a rather dusty answer because I'd heard that before. The one thing that sort of slightly persuaded me was this Yorkshire accent, you see. I said, well, the man comes from Yorkshire, so maybe there's more chance of getting it back than, because Yorkshire people tend to do what they say they're going to do. And then he sent me an email saying, if you watch on your laptop, the ship bringing the container back sends a signal.
Great.
You can follow it, and it's landed in Felixstowe, and now it's in York.
Lovely.
Come up and open the container. So
great.
I think the container had actually been opened already, but
We'd had a sneaky
ceremoniously, I opened the container, and then was obviously expected, and I was going to be a bit cynical about this, to be, oh my goodness, but in fact it was not cynicism at all. It really was a sort of, oh my goodness. And I wasn't actually weepy, but I wasn't far short of it, because here were these bits of metal, and that's about what it was. It was bits of derelict metal. I mean, you can see photographs. The car is sort of recognizable as a car, but only just.
And it was in the container by itself, was it?
Yes.
No, what happened was Oxford had been damaged, so the hardtop had gone back on.
Yeah.
On ascension, it looks like it's rolled down a hill.
Yeah.
On the passenger side rear wing and stove the rear wing in so badly that they've taken the hardtop off to straighten the damage out, and then because it's buckled the top rail, they haven't been able to get the hardtop on. So what they did with the hardtop and back door, because things are valuable out there, they then turned Oxford into a pickup and took the hardtop and rear door and transferred that onto the chap's 88 that he
88,
had.
right,
So
okay.
that meant I had to do a deal with him where I got the remains of Oxford and his 88.
Yeah.
Because that still had the hardtop bolted to it in the rear door.
So this
Well,
must
it's
have
a good story.
Yeah.
It's a very good story, this.
It's
and
brilliant.
And so today, having seen this car today here at the Gaydon Land Rover show, what do you think of the car today?
Oh, marvellous. There's one element I think we're missing. Can I
Yeah,
be so
up to
bold?
far away.
Why is that car so damned famous? Why is it?
Well-
Probably because it achieved that journey.
Of course.
Why did it achieve? See, London to Calcutta been done before the war.
Yeah.
When we said, let it be known, that we were going to give it a bash to get all the way to Singapore, the vast majority of people said you are both geographically ignorant and politically naive. You're idiots. You won't succeed. Which had the effect of making us even more determined to do it.
Yeah.
And yes, London to Calcutta we did, and we had a contract from a young producer in the BBC called Attenborough, which in those days, he wasn't very well known, but he put his faith in us. Gave us £250 for a camera.
Did he?
£250 a lot of money.
It was a lot of money.
And he gave us enough film, as he said, to get you to Istanbul and send it back, air freight it back. And if I like what I see, I'll send more. Well, he did like what he saw, and he did send more. And we got to Calcutta, and then we did, which was really the nursery slopes.
Yeah, well, Thornycroft had done it, hadn't they, to
A number
Calcutta?
of people had done it, and a number of expeditions or proto-expeditions had been put together to give it a bash beyond. Not least the Daily Mail had an idea on. But nobody had succeeded. The difficulty was getting from India to Burma.
Yeah.
The different cultures, different religion, different language, different everything. Never been any intercourse. And between the two, the Naga Hills, the heaviest rainfall in the world, 400 inches a year. Now that's a lot of water. And we struck it in one of the driest seasons on record. And we were extremely well equipped, and a journey of 220 something miles for the first town in Burma from India. 220 miles. We're allowing 10 days. It took us 4 days. So
Amazing.
Things were sort of easier.
So you had luck with you?
We had luck with us. And then, similarly, there was a gap, no road at all in southern Thailand. So people who had attempted to come north from Malaya to drive back to Europe, that was a no-no.
Yeah.
However, we heard that some bulldozers had just been put through that 100 miles to drive a trace through onto which the surveyors could go to plot a proper highway, which wasn't actually built for
Yes,
another
I think
8 to
you
9
mentioned
years.
all this, didn't you?
And we made that down that highway, and we go to Singapore. So I mean, why that vehicle is famous, or why, is because it did something that people said, you're wasting your bloody time. You can't do it.
Well, that's great.
I think it's more than that, because for me, and bear in mind, I'm sort of completely out of it. Didn't know you at all. Didn't know anything about it really. But me and people like Phil Hooker and people who've been around today and have been getting you to sign these books that they all bought when you wrote them, and that book was iconic. And none of us ever thought we'd actually meet any of the team when we read them. And so many people have still got that book, and that book is still in print. So I think it's the book that gave us the story and made us feel that we've taken the trip with you, and made us understand how much it meant and why it was so difficult. And it was a beautiful book. It was brilliantly written.
Well, that's very kind.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. But for people, it gave people a real insight, and that was one of the first real insights where you really covered it beautifully, that people could actually be on that journey.
Yeah.
And that's the start of the adventure of Land Rovers.
Well, it was not a very difficult book to write, because in effect we had five interesting people. Well, me, I don't know whether I was interesting, but the other five interesting, all slightly different characters. And in my own sort of praise, if I may, the one thing I realised very early on was that if you just wrote a book about the travel, it would be no good. But we had 6 people, and sort of me and 5 other, and they each. I gave them characters, slightly exaggerated in some senses.
I was going to ask that, actually.
Well, but to bring out the character, because if you're writing a book about people, it's the differences between them. And, you know, someone like BB, the cameraman, photographer, he was a sort of disciplinarian, and frankly, he got on our wick more than once. But it was invaluable.
I remember the stories you told in that village hall at Dunsfold 20 odd years ago. And if the good lady hadn't come in to shut the hall, I think we'd have gone on until 7 in the morning, because we were fascinated, absolutely fascinated.
Well, I do know the book is still in print. And how many prints has it had now? I think it's on its 4th edition. How many times has it been republished?
I think it's in its 8th edition. But there's one edition which really tickles me, if I may. It's the Italian edition.
Is it?
Yes, because it's a pirate. They did not ask anybody's permission. It's totally out of copyright. They've done, but I'm more tickled by the fact that there's a pirate edition than if it was legitimate. You know, because the guy, I think you'll appreciate.
Well, I think probably on that note, I think we've covered it for this evening. But thank you very much. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
It been fantastic to listen to you, and you know, to anybody who's listening to this, do read the book First Overland. Most fantastic book. Thank you, Diana, for what you've done today, and you, sir, Adam, for bringing the car back. Yes. And I hope it's of great interest to you forever and ever. And why not start on one of the others now, and one of the others? And
but just before I go, I'll just say we've got a chap called Graham Aldous, and you've probably heard of him before.
Yep.
He's currently making an exceptionally good DVD called After Overland. So he's been to interview all the people, and he's put a load of donkey work in.
Lovely.
And what he's done there is about to go with that. So
lovely. Well, last word from Tim.
Yes,
thank you.
One of the things that thrills me, you know, and it's 62 years ago, is with Adam in that car on the motorway, and you'll get almost any Land Rover coming past, going beep, 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 and waving their hands, because they can see on the back door, First Overland, and they say, hey, wait a minute, I can't, it is, and that beep, 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 and they marvellous.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. And a very great discussion.
Well, we'll be back tomorrow with the Gaydon Land Rover show here, of course, for 2018, 70 years of Land Rover, one of the epic and most monumental stories. So I hope you join you then. We're going live again later. We've got a little bit of live going on at some point.
Yeah, this is recorded. What I'd like to do, you wanted to have the doors
Yep.
signing. I wondered if we propped the door up on the winch on the front of the van. Just go for the top.
Okay, so sorry about that. We had a slight technical hitch there. Yeah, at this point we chose to take them outside. We wanted them to sign this fabulous 86-inch door bottom that Gumtree 4x4, of course, John Bowden, the lovely John Bowden, provided for us. Bought here by Britpart. And we got him to sign it along with other esteemed, notable Land Rover people. We haven't been in such esteemed Land Rover company for a very, very long time. It was a joy to see. And what a wonderful interview to find out just a little bit more about what was happening, how that event panned out, how it started, the whole story behind it. It's been a really epic day here, and it's been a joy to be part of it. This is the start of the journey. When you see events like this, the Oxford a story, the whole thing unfold with the Overland book, of course, that tells the story. If you can get a copy, do read it. But when you see that, Barbara Toy, we had Pollyanna here. These are the vehicles that kicked off such an interest in Overland expedition. We had Camel, we had G4. The whole story follows on from there. But these were the early pioneers, the people that set off and decided that in a Land Rover they could conquer the world. And they did. It was a wonderful, wonderful story. And then to hear about the rescue, that in itself, quite extraordinary. Adam Bennett, what a story he had to tell. There's far more to it as well, and I'm sure it will be recorded and told in many venues. If you get the chance, do go and have a look. More importantly, if you ever get the chance, do read Overland. It's a beautiful book. Tim Slessor, what a gentleman, what an absolute gentleman. And Adam Bennett, true steel determination as well to get that vehicle back and bring back a bit more Land Rover history. And thank heavens for people like that. And they are the people that make up shows like this. They're the people that hold on to our history, that preserve our history, and then bring the history out. And it is a rolling, driving museum that comes to the shows and tells us all about how Land Rover has evolved over 70 years. 70 years. It's truly an iconic vehicle, but only because of the people that have got on board and made this vehicle as capable as it ever can be. All the little modifications, all the epic journeys planned, all the dreams, all come to fruition because of Land Rover and because of the people that believe in it. It's a truly remarkable story. Tomorrow we're going to delve even deeper into it. We're going to start with a decade by decade display. We're going to bring in the very early vehicles, the 48s, and the vehicles that took on Land Rover, and Land Rover forged past them all. We'll go through the decades 50s, 60s, 70s. We've got vintage retro singers here, my favourite thing. They'll be interspersing the actual shows that we're going to be doing with all these decades. We've got music from those decades as well. So we're going to recreate the history of Land Rover through those 70 years, through those 7 decades, right up to the present day. And then we're going to have one heck of a party. So do feel free to join us. We'll be doing live throughout the day. We'll be chatting, interviews. We'll be recording as well, getting more people to sign this precious door, because we love this store, the 86-inch that Gumtree 4x4, John Bowden, Sir John, provided for us. Britpart bought to us. Dave Mitchell coming tomorrow with another door just in case we run out of space. So there'll be more on that. Dunswold, very interested to look after this door for us for posterity once we've got all the icons and the legends of Land Rover signed it. So this weekend with Gaydon Land Rover Show, we are truly marking a new line in the sand, because from here on we've got electric vehicles, we've got driverless vehicles. It's all going to change. And this is a really precious year. So we hope you enjoy the rest of the Gaydon Land Rover shows with us day 2 tomorrow. We'll be back in the arena from 10 o'clock. If you can get down, come and join us. There's loads happening, and do get here for the party. If you can't, stay with us on the live broadcast, and we look forward to any questions, any answers, and any comments, and we'd like you to join us if you can. So we'll see you tomorrow for day 2, Gaydon Land Rover Show 2018, 70 years of Land Rover. Look forward to tomorrow.